Hi, I'm Allison,
I'm Sarah.
and today we're going to be presenting on the Equal Justice Initiative.
Alrighty, so just a little bit about the Equal Justice Initiative. It was founded in 1989 by its founder, Bryan Stevenson. He was a criminal justice lawyer in Alabama, and his mission with Equal Justice Initiative was to end mass incarceration, and he is using this organization to help people who are marginalized and who aren't receiving the justice that they deserve. So this is the mission and the purpose. Their purpose is to do work that hasn't been done. There is a lack of fighting for those who are marginalized at the moment, and people are failing to pay attention to what's really happening. They work on a range of subjects or groupings, including prison reform, racial justice, public education, and they also bring just awareness to what happened throughout history, revolving injustices through museums and exhibits.
So I think it's important to point out that this nonprofit is a 501c3 nonprofit, so it is tax exempt. And what makes this nonprofit so amazing is that they have really, really strong leadership. And Bryan Stevenson has kind of just made this nonprofit have a really strong mission, and he has put his entire life into creating criminal justice reform. So a little bit about Bryan Stevenson. He is a lawyer. He's a social justice activist. He's obviously the founder of EJI. And he also teaches law at New York University. And kind of more recently, he has written a book called Just Mercy, and it actually turned into a film in 2019 starring Michael B. Jordan, who plays Bryan Stevenson. And I read the book about a year ago and then watched the movie afterwards. And it is just like a life-changing read. So if you have a chance, I would totally recommend doing that. A little more about Bryan Stevenson. He is featured in the documentary 13th, which talks about the 13th Amendment. He's done numerous TED Talks. He created the Legacy Museum, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. He has 40 honorary doctorates. He won the Genius Prize and the ABA Medal and the American Bar Association's highest honor. So he has a lot of accolades, and he just has created really strong leadership for this nonprofit.
Alrighty, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Equal Justice Initiative's work in the media. So basically, if they were featured in the news or just something that was found in the media. So the first one is on their lynching victim exhibit. So this is a memorial dedicated to those who were victims of lynchings. This is actually really, really popular, and there were a lot of articles about this, and they brought in over 750,000 people, which is a lot, and that was right before COVID. So they also did open it back up following COVID safety. But I think this is something that is really important because we don't see that a lot. We don't see recognition for the darker side of history, like the more truthful side of history. And so I think it's really important that they're highlighting this. Another thing that was found was about them speaking about Alabama prisons. There was a major increase in homicides across the prisons in Alabama. There was 13 homicides in 2019 in 1 year, and it talked about how it had grown a lot, and so finally EJI stepped up and said something about it. And it's just sad because a lot of the time people aren't going to pay attention to what's happening to prisoners, but that's one of their main focuses, and they actually care about the people. And so reading this was pretty amazing to hear about what they did. And then another thing that I found was an ad week, and it was mostly about Bryan Stevenson, but also about the Equal Justice Initiative as a whole and what they're doing and their story. And I think that this encapsulated them really well. And it talked a lot about Bryan Stevenson's method of storytelling, and his documentaries and things like that.
So a little look into the organization itself, about its staff, volunteers, in their push for education. So on their staff, they actually have 10 board of directors. And a lot of these, as looking into the 990, they are not paid. And so they're doing this work pro bono. But it's just like a really strong and tight knit group of people. Again, pointing back to a really strong leadership of this organization. But total, they actually have 66 employees. So that can be legal assistants, lawyers, receptionists. They kind of range from just what makes this organization so strong and great. They have a decent amount of employees that are all really trusted. And so kind of moving into their volunteers, a lot of nonprofits rely heavily on volunteer work, but EJI is different in the fact that they have actually 0 volunteers because this is really highly trained work. Revolving around the law, people need to be trained in this. So they can't just take in people to volunteer for a few hours a week. They actually have to have really trained employees. But since they don't have volunteers, they actually have different ways for people to get plugged into their organization, because I think EJI realizes that in order to gain support from the public, they still need to have ways for people to plug in and to volunteer. So there's the opportunity for them to volunteer for local branches that fight injustice, such as the Homeboy, the Advancement Project, and the Human Rights Pen Pals. And I think the Human Rights Pen Pals is actually super cool, where you can just write someone that is serving time in prison and kind of just bring hope into the world. And along with the volunteer work, they put a really strong emphasis on how important it is to bring education to our racial history. And so EJI really wants the community to dive into this education portion and really confront the racial history head on. So on their website, there's a chance for you to host an event about criminal justice education. They really want people to vote, because that's the way things are going to change, is when our policies change about criminal justice and mass incarceration, and also just to support local and grassroots organizations that are doing really good work in the community. And so since they can't have volunteers, they really want people to still find ways to get plugged in and draw them into what their nonprofit is doing every day. So a little bit about their communication. They're actually really, really active on social media. And so here's just a look into each of their different social medias and how they've kind of adapted their communication for each avenue. And that's something we've talked about a lot in our PR classes, that each platform of social media kind of has a different language that they use. And so EJI has really figured out how to create a cohesive message, but still cater to each specific platform. So on the left-hand side, we have our Instagram, and what they do really well on Instagram is that they're constantly using stories, and they're constantly engaging with their followers from their stories and comments, and posting things that are really relevant to the climate of the world. And actually, they have created a really awesome campaign called the On This Day campaign. Basically, what they do, you can kind of see it on the right-hand side on Facebook, but what they do every single day is they post something that happened on this day years ago that confronts racial history, and they turn it into a blog post, and it's a calendar, and they just explain more about what's happening. And this kind of brings us back to the point about education that we talked about earlier, is that even if you can't get plugged in, you can still educate yourself every single day, because there's something in our country's history that has happened every single day. So the On This Day campaign has been happening for a long time. And every day on social media, I wake up and I see the On This Day, and I'm like, okay, well, what didn't I know that I can read more about? And it's really just plugging people in that way, which just drives them back to the website. It drives traffic to their social media platforms, and it really just gets people connected that way. And aside from their social media, their website is like absolutely gorgeous and comprehensive. And it really just brings people to a great landing page with lots of information. So here's just what you see when you open up their website. It shows the latest news. It shows what's happened on this day, explore Reconstruction. And it's just a great place for a lot of history lessons. And along with that, they have just different tabs that show their work, news, about, and where you can donate, which is really important. So here's a little bit of a look into the work that they do that's showcased on their website. So you see that they do criminal justice reform, they do racial justice, public education, and they have their museum and memorial. So this is just a place where you can see it all in one place. And then along with that, this is their donation page, which is obviously very important because they are a nonprofit, so they rely heavily on donations, and they need to have a great place on their website where people can easily navigate the donation tab, know that it's a 501c3 nonprofit organization. It's backed by GuideStar and registered as a nonprofit, and it's tax deductible. And so just having these questions on the side, is my donation secure? Will I receive a receipt? All these things that people want to know before they donate, they're making it very easy for people to donate to the nonprofit and really get plugged in that way. And so here is just a deeper dive into the 990. And so this is just where EJI's finances lie, and they're very transparent with their finances and where they get all their money. And as you can see, this is like a lot of money, especially for a nonprofit. This is obviously a bigger nonprofit that is generating a lot of money every single year. So on the left-hand side, you can see that the grants and donations actually make up the majority of the finances every year. And so they've really learned how to use grants from the government to their favor to get the most out of what the government is willing to give for nonprofits that are doing great work, such as criminal justice reform. And so almost $37 million come from grants and donations. So that's a huge chunk of their money. The other thing that is making a lot of money are kind of divided into three different categories. So we have like special events. So fundraising events that increase fundraising, increase donations, that's $800,000. And then a really cool aspect of this nonprofit is that they actually have an online store. And so their merchandise sales makes a lot of money every year. So they have these little tote bags, they have sweatshirts, they have pins, they have calendars, just like a really wide range of things that you can buy. So the online store helps generate almost $1 million in income every year. And then the last thing that they make money off of, but is a non-cash contribution. So like laptops, books, legal documents that they may need paid for, that's $882,000. So total, they are making a lot of money, almost $40,000 or $40 million every single year off of all these different financial avenues. And I think they've really just diversified the way that they're able to make money, but they're also just super transparent with where this money is going, what they're doing, and they've really just used every single dollar that is donated to the best of their advantage. So this is just a little different portion of the 990 that I found really interesting. And so this compares the previous year to the current year. And mind you, this was back in 2017. That's their most recent 990. But you can kind of see that from 2016 to 2017, every single avenue of their finances increased greatly. And at the very bottom, you see the net assets and fund balances, almost $30,000 increase. So that's insane from year to year. This organization is just growing so greatly since it was founded. And every year they're just harnessing more support from the public, and they're able to just make a lot more money. One thing I found really, really interesting about this was that the employee's salary is $4 million, almost $5 million that they pay a year. And when you divide that into the number of employees that they have, so they have 66 employees, that's only about $71,000 a year, which some people may be a lot, but these are lawyers that are doing legal work. And so for a lawyer, that's like not a lot of money. So I kind of looked more into who's getting paid, whatever. And Brian Stevenson himself actually doesn't receive a paycheck. So he does his work pro bono because it's for the greater good of the people. And so he's become to a place where he no longer needs to get paid. So everything is getting put back into the organization. And that kind of just got me interested in like who else is a part of this organization that is doing this work pro bono. And he had no reportable compensation. So you can kind of see number 12 at the bottom that it says 0 and 0. So none of his compensation was reported because he does all of his work pro bono and he puts his whole life into this organization. So some things we learned from this project that we're doing and just what we learned about public relations itself is how important the constant communication is. And you can see with EJI, that they're super active on all of their social media platforms. And so they have things such as their like ongoing campaign, this on this day campaign, which are updated every single day. So there's someone obviously doing full-time social media as their job and updating these things every day. They have really great relationships with media outlets. So they're harnessing like that media coverage, having story written about their organization, and they're just bringing the public into the volunteer work. So they're doing the education, able to host events, get people to vote, all of these things. And it's really just like evoking pathos so that people are able to drive change, which we know is a cornerstone of public relations. You want those mutual beneficial relationships where I'm helping you and then you help me, and it just brings people together really. And so it's really just important to develop these like long-term relationships.
I'm going to talk about like what I saw when we were doing this project. Something that like we learned specifically in this class a little bit more and like throughout PR is the importance of storytelling. It's like, especially for nonprofit organizations, like receiving that empathy and like making it personal, and finding a good way to explain your mission and explain your organization. It's like so important to tell a story. And so even going back to like Allison's slide and like looking at social media is a platform for storytelling. And so it's really awesome to see them constantly updating it and using creative ways like this honest day and like using their stories. Another thing is that Stevenson had actually talked about how he really values the use of storytelling and how he's worked with companies like HBO, TED Talk, and different documentaries to tell the story of EJI. I don't know why that was so hard for me. But yeah, it's just something that like I'm definitely going to take away with me from this class is the value of storytelling and how important it is for us to do. So this is a summary of what we talked about today in our presentation. So we talked about EJI and Brian Stevenson and how they are doing the work to change to change the country, involving criminal justice reform and just injustice in general, like across the board. Another thing that we talked about is communication. Allison talked about this, and how they are doing a very good job at communicating with everyone through their social media and through their website.
And some other things we kind of talked about was how transparent they are with their finances. And when a nonprofit is transparent with their finances, they obviously get more people to donate because they know that whatever dollar they're donating is going towards really good work, and they can track that in the 990 form. And another thing that I found was really important was that they're just taking advantage of all of the government resources and grants that they can get. These are like people's lives at stake, and the government has money that they can hand out for these kind of nonprofits. And so EJI has really just said, like, we're going to take advantage of every single grant that the government will give us to get people out of prisons and to reform the prison system. And the last thing was that they're just harnessing the support of donors and volunteers from all over, and they're getting people plugged into their local communities. So even though this is based in Montgomery, Alabama, they're getting people from all over the country to plug into the grassroots organizations in their own cities and support criminal justice reform wherever they are. And here are just some like really amazing quotes from Brian Stevenson that I really love. So the first one is, we cannot achieve justice unless we're willing to do uncomfortable things. And Brian Stevenson just lives this out in his life. I think Brian Stevenson is a really admirable person because he is someone that we can all look up to for his leadership, and the way he's really stepped into uncomfortable situations and really changed them for the greater good. And then the last quote here is that the opposite of poverty isn't wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice. And I really just think this shows how tuned in he is to not acquiring wealth. As we can see in his 90 form, he doesn't care about how much money he makes. He's really just concerned with bringing justice to the people that need it the most. And so, yeah, it was really awesome to study this nonprofit and see the really great work that they're doing and the way they've really used PR efforts to make the most of their nonprofit. Thank you.
Thank you.